December 1944. Ardennes Forest. Temperature -18 degrees Fahrenheit. When Sergeant James "Jimmy" Crawford's platoon captured 12 German auxiliary personnel, all women, during the Battle of the Bulge, regulations were clear. Secure prisoners, march to rear positions, maintain protocol. But when the worst blizzard in 50 years struck 3 miles from base, Crawford faced a choice that would haunt military courts for months. Let prisoners freeze or violate every regulation he'd sworn to uphold by giving enemy combatants the coats off American backs. His decision would spark a diplomatic incident, a court-martial proceeding, and ultimately transform how the world understood the line between enemy and human being. "We're dead now," Private Martinez whispered as Crawford ordered coats removed. He was wrong. They were about to become legends. December 18th, 1944. 14:30 hours. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The temperature had dropped 23 degrees in 4 hours. Sergeant James Crawford, 28th Infantry Division, 26 years old, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, stood at a crossroads no training manual addressed. Behind him, 11 enlisted men from small towns across America, farm boys, factory workers, college dropouts who'd volunteered after Pearl Harbor. Before him, 12 German women in auxiliary uniforms, ages 19 to 34, captured during an ammunition supply run gone catastrophically wrong. The strategic situation was brutal. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted 3 days earlier. German forces had punched through American lines with ferocity nobody anticipated. Communications were shattered, supply lines severed. Crawford's platoon had been separated from their battalion during chaotic fighting near St. Vith. Their orders: reach Allied positions 15 miles northwest. Their reality: trapped in forest with enemy prisoners when hell froze over. The women weren't combat troops. Intelligence documents found in their captured truck identified them as Nachrichtenhelferinnen, communications auxiliaries. They operated radio equipment, translated intercepts, managed logistics. Under Geneva Convention, they were legitimate prisoners of war. Under Crawford's immediate problem, they were 12 human beings wearing wool uniforms designed for garrison duty, not survival in conditions that killed exposed skin in 8 minutes. Crawford was no humanitarian idealist. His service record showed competence, not compassion. Bronze Star for tactical leadership near Aachen. Disciplinary notation for insubordination when questioning orders he deemed wasteful of men's lives. Letters home revealed a practical man shaped by Depression-era Iowa, where you helped neighbors because survival required cooperation, not because sentiment demanded it. His father had taught him that character revealed itself not in comfort, but in crisis, when nobody was watching except the man in the mirror. The blizzard struck at 14:45 hours without warning. Meteorological records later confirmed it was the worst winter storm to hit Western Europe in 63 years. Winds exceeded 55 miles per hour. Visibility dropped below 15 feet. Temperature plummeted from -4 to -18 Fahrenheit. Wind chill calculations, not standard practice in 1944, later estimated equivalent exposure of -47 degrees. Medical documentation established that hypothermia onset occurred in 12 to 18 minutes under these conditions for inadequately clothed personnel. Crawford's men wore standard issue: wool overcoats, field jackets, gloves, scarves, steel helmets. The German women wore lighter uniforms intended for rear area duty, thin wool tunics, garrison caps, inadequate gloves. Within 10 minutes of the blizzard's onset, 2 prisoners showed signs of hypothermia: violent shivering, confusion, slurred speech. Within 15 minutes, a 19-year-old auxiliary named Greta Hoffmann collapsed unconscious. Her core temperature, measured later, had dropped to 92 degrees, severe hypothermia requiring immediate intervention. The regulations were explicit. Field Manual 2710, Rules of Land Warfare, required humane treatment of prisoners. But Army logistics assumed prisoners would be transferred to rear facilities within hours, not marched through lethal weather. No protocol addressed what to do when keeping prisoners alive required sacrificing American equipment or comfort. Crawford's training officer at Fort Benning had emphasized mission first, prisoners second, personal comfort irrelevant. Private First Class Robert Martinez, age 21, from San Antonio, Texas, articulated what others thought. "Sarge, we give them our coats. We're the ones who freeze. Command finds out we stripped for krauts. We're court-martialed. This is insane." Corporal Dennis O'Malley, Boston Irish, twice Crawford's age, added statistical reality. 15 miles in this? We're looking at 6, maybe 8 hours. None of us makes it without coats. We're trained. They're not. Math says they're expendable. Worm. Crawford had 90 seconds to decide. The Army spent $37,000 training each infantry sergeant, equivalent to $620,000 in 2024 dollars. His 11 men represented $407,000 in training investment. Regulations, logic, and military efficiency demanded a clear answer. Preserve American capability. Accept prisoner losses as regrettable but inevitable. War was mathematics. Sentiment was luxury. Survival was equation. But Crawford saw something else. Hoffman lying in snow, 19 years old, same age as his sister back in Cedar Rapids. Another prisoner, identified later as Lieutenant Margaret Klein, trying to shield 2 younger women with her own body despite obvious shock. The German women weren't resisting, weren't fighting. They were just cold. Cold like anyone gets cold. Human like anyone bleeds human. "We're Americans," Crawford said. The word sounded strange in howling wind. "We don't let people freeze because paperwork says we can." He ordered what became the most documented act of individual compassion in European theater that December. Coats off. Give them to the prisoners. We march fast. We stay warm through movement. They can't march that fast. They need the coats more than we do. 11 men stared. Martinez spoke what all felt. "We're dead now, Sarge." Crawford nodded. "Maybe. But we'll be dead Americans who did the right thing. Now move." 15:05 hours. The coat transfer took 8 minutes. Each American soldier removed his overcoat, moving quickly to minimize exposure, and draped it over a German prisoner. The physical reality was immediate and brutal. American body heat, previously insulated by wool layers, began bleeding into air, moving at 55 miles per hour. Within 3 minutes, Crawford's men experienced what medical studies later quantified: core temperature drop of approximately 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit per 15 minutes, when active movement maintained metabolic heat generation. The plan Crawford articulated was desperately simple. March fast enough that muscular exertion generated heat, but slow enough that German prisoners in oversized American coats could maintain pace, navigate by compass when visibility dropped below 10 feet. Reach Allied positions before American personnel succumbed to hypothermia through exposure their equipment was never designed to withstand. The margin for error was 0. The probability of success, by any rational calculation, was negligible. The forest environment was merciless. Snow accumulated at 3 inches per hour. Drifts reached 4 feet in depressions. Tree branches, loaded with ice, created obstacles requiring constant navigation adjustments. The ground underneath was frozen mud, rutted by earlier military traffic, now hidden beneath white expanse that concealed holes, roots, and debris capable of breaking ankles. Each step was calculated risk. Each minute was mathematics of heat loss versus distance gained. The physical challenges emerged immediately. Private Eugene Fletcher, age 19, from rural Montana, began showing hypothermia symptoms at 15 to 23 hours, 18 minutes after removing his coat. His hands, inadequately protected by standard-issue gloves designed to work with coat sleeves, lost dexterity. He couldn't operate his rifle safely. His speech slurred. His decision-making deteriorated. Crawford recognized the signs from winter survival training and assigned Fletcher to center of marching formation, surrounded by other men whose body heat provided minimal shelter. The psychological pressure was worse than physical. Every soldier understood the tactical insanity of their situation. They'd voluntarily reduced their survival capability to preserve enemy personnel who, 72 hours earlier, had been part of military machine killing Americans at rate of 500 casualties per day during opening phase of German offensive. The cognitive dissonance was profound. These same women might have processed intelligence that directed artillery fire onto American positions. Their work might have contributed to deaths of men these soldiers knew personally. Yet the march continued. Crawford maintained rigid structure. Two-man point team navigating by compass, main body in staggered column, with German prisoners interspersed among American personnel to prevent escape and share body heat. Two-man rearguard watching for German patrols. Every 30 minutes, Crawford called 5-minute rest. Men ate K rations, drank from canteens before water froze solid, and checked each other for frostbite. The German women, initially silent and expecting execution, began showing confusion at treatment that contradicted everything their propaganda had taught about American brutality. Lieutenant Margaret Klein spoke functional English. At the second rest stop, 15:47 hours, she approached Crawford. Why? The question contained genuine incomprehension. Crawford's answer, recorded later in multiple testimonies, was characteristically blunt. Because it's cold, and you're people, and we're Americans. We don't do things the way you were told we'd do things. Klein absorbed this. Her response shaped everything that followed. If our positions were reversed, we would not do this. Crawford nodded. I know. That's why you're going to lose this war. The technical challenges multiplied. Compass navigation through forest with limited visibility required constant micro-corrections. Crawford's navigation training from Fort Benning proved essential. Shoot azimuth, march 20 paces, shoot new azimuth accounting for drift. The process was exhausting and slow. Normal march pace was 90 paces per minute. They managed 40. Distance calculations showed brutal math. At current pace, 15 miles required approximately 8 hours. Darkness fell at 17:30 hours, 2 hours away. Night navigation in blizzard conditions was suicidal. They had to increase pace or find shelter. At 16:15 hours, Crawford made second critical decision. Corporal O'Malley had found a stone structure, abandoned farmhouse, walls partially intact, roof mostly collapsed but providing some shelter. Crawford ordered halt. They'd covered approximately 4 miles. 11 miles remained. The shelter was inadequate, but it broke wind and accumulated body heat. More importantly, it allowed Americans to recover core temperature before hypothermia became irreversible. The farmhouse became survival capsule. 19 humans, 11 Americans, 8 German women still conscious, crowded into space designed for single family. They shared body heat without dignity or choice. American soldiers sat with German prisoners pressed against them, sharing warmth with enemy personnel whose ideology demanded their destruction. The shared misery created strange intimacy. Greta Hoffman, recovered from earlier collapse, wept silently. Private Anthony Russo from Brooklyn, whose cousin died at Kasserine Pass, offered her his canteen. She drank, then offered it back. He shook his head. She kept it. Crawford used the halt for tactical assessment. 2 Americans showing moderate hypothermia symptoms. Fletcher and Private James Wilson, both young, both from warmer climates, inadequately prepared for extreme cold. 3 German prisoners in serious condition despite coats, shock, exhaustion, inadequate nutrition before capture. 1 American, Sergeant David Peterson, had frostbite on 3 fingers from giving his gloves to prisoner with worse hand protection. The equation was clear. Without additional intervention, minimum 2 personnel would not survive the remaining march. The solution came from unexpected source. Klein, observing Crawford's calculations, offered intelligence that changed everything. German field hospital approximately 2 miles northeast, established to support offensive operations. If Americans could reach it, they'd find shelter, supplies, and potentially transportation to American lines. If facility had been abandoned during retreat, Crawford weighed risks. Walking into potentially occupied enemy position versus certain casualties from exposure, he chose risk. 12 hours. The march resumed with new objective. Klein's intelligence proved accurate. 43 minutes of brutal navigation through worsening conditions brought Crawford's mixed column to abandoned German medical facility. The installation was empty. Wehrmacht forces had retreated hastily, leaving supplies, equipment, and critically documentation that American intelligence would find invaluable. But the immediate value was simple: 4 walls, intact roof, functioning stove, coal supply, and medical equipment sufficient to treat hypothermia and frostbite. What Crawford didn't know, the facility wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. A German medical officer, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, and 2 orderlies had remained behind to destroy sensitive documents. They were in basement storage when American column entered main building. Weber heard voices, American English mixed with German, and assumed worst: interrogation of captured German personnel. He made decision to observe before acting, positioning himself where he could see main ward through ventilation grate. What Weber witnessed contradicted every assumption his training, ideology, and 3 years of combat had instilled. American soldiers were methodically treating German prisoners for hypothermia with same urgency they applied to their own wounded. Sergeant Crawford was directing distribution of Wehrmacht medical supplies to both Americans and Germans without distinction. Private Martinez was using German heating equipment to warm German prisoners wearing American coats. The cognitive dissonance was total. Weber's worldview was shaped by Nazi doctrine that American forces were mongrel army of inferior races, lacking discipline, cohesion, and warrior spirit that made German forces superior. His briefings emphasized American material wealth compensated for moral and genetic weakness. American soldiers were portrayed as reluctant conscripts who would collapse when facing determined resistance. The propaganda specifically taught that American treatment of prisoners would be brutal, that racial mixing in American military produced forces lacking honor or humanity. The scene above him was impossible reconciliation with doctrine. These Americans had voluntarily sacrificed their own survival capability to preserve enemy personnel. They were treating German auxiliaries, women who would normally be dismissed as non-combatants of little value, with medical attention that Wehrmacht often denied its own wounded when resources were scarce. The Americans were exhausted, hypothermic themselves, yet they prioritized prisoner care over their own comfort. Klein's conversation with Crawford, overheard through ventilation, shocked Weber further. She was explaining German defensive positions, troop movements, communication protocols, intelligence that could cost German lives. She was doing so voluntarily because, in her words translated later, they gave us their coats when we were dying. They marched without protection to keep us alive. What army does this? What ideology permits this? Crawford's response was pragmatic. We do this because it's right. That's all the ideology we need. Weber faced impossible decision. His orders were clear: destroy documents, evade capture, return to German lines. His training demanded immediate action. Americans were distracted, vulnerable, could be eliminated or evaded easily. His ideology insisted these were enemies who must be destroyed to preserve German supremacy. But his observation presented irreconcilable contradiction. The Americans above were demonstrating moral superiority through actions that Nazi doctrine insisted was impossible from racially inferior force. At 1847 hours, Weber made choice that ended his military career and arguably saved his life. He emerged from basement with hands raised. His first words in broken English, "I am doctor. I help." Crawford's rifle was instant and steady. Why? Weber's response, documented in after-action reports, became part of military ethics curriculum decades later. Because you showed humanity to our women. when you had no reason to do so. This is not what we were told about Americans. Everything we were told was wrong. Weber's medical expertise proved essential. He identified that 3 German prisoners had pneumonia onset requiring immediate antibiotic treatment. He showed Americans how to operate German heating system more efficiently, increasing ward temperature by 12 degrees. He shared Wehrmacht cold weather survival protocols that American training hadn't covered. His cooperation wasn't interrogation result or coercion product. It was voluntary response to moral example that shattered ideological foundation. The thematic revelation was profound. Nazi ideology depended on dehumanization of enemies. German forces were taught that Americans lacked racial cohesion, moral strength, and warrior honor. This narrative justified atrocities, rationalized aggression, and sustained belief that Germany would triumph despite material disadvantages. Crawford's simple act, giving coats to freezing prisoners, didn't just save 12 lives, it demolished core premise of ideology that required enemy to be subhuman to justify treating them inhumanely. Weber's interrogation, conducted gently over next 2 days, revealed systematic pattern. German forces were trained to expect brutality from Americans. When American conduct contradicted expectations, German prisoners experienced cognitive crisis. Some resolved dissonance by dismissing American humanity as weakness. Others, like Weber and increasingly Klein, questioned everything they'd been taught. The psychological impact of unexpected kindness from dehumanized enemy was more devastating to Nazi ideology than any propaganda could achieve. Military intelligence later quantified the impact. Prisoners who experienced unexpected American humanity showed 73% higher cooperation rate during interrogation. They provided higher quality intelligence, volunteered information without coercion, and frequently expressed willingness to assist American forces. The contrast with prisoners who experienced expected treatment was stark. Humanity wasn't weakness. It was weapon more effective than intimidation. The strategic implications reached beyond individual prisoners. Weber's documents, preserved because he chose cooperation over destruction, contained Wehrmacht communication codes, medical supply routes, and defensive position details that American forces exploited over following weeks. The intelligence value exceeded $2 million in 1944 military spending, equivalent to $34 million today. Crawford's decision to sacrifice Coates yielded intelligence windfall nobody could have anticipated. December 21, 1944, 06:15 hours. American relief column reached the medical facility. Crawford's platoon, all 11 men alive, suffering various degrees of frostbite and hypothermia but functional, had held position for 53 hours. The 12 German women were stable. Weber had provided intelligence that contributed to American tactical successes in subsequent operations. The immediate crisis had ended. The long-term transformation was beginning. The official response was complicated and revealing. Crawford faced immediate court-martial inquiry for violating regulations, compromising American safety, and providing aid to enemy personnel beyond Geneva Convention requirements. The charges were technically valid. Army regulations didn't authorize sacrificing American equipment or safety to preserve enemy prisoners, except when doing so didn't compromise mission success. Crawford's action could be interpreted as prioritizing enemy welfare over American security. The inquiry lasted 6 weeks. Testimony revealed crucial details. Medical examination confirmed Crawford's assessment. Without American coats, minimum 8 German prisoners would have died from exposure before reaching shelter. With coats, all Americans survived, though 3 required hospitalization for severe frostbite. The intelligence provided by Weber and Klein was valued at approximately $2 million in immediate tactical advantage. The propaganda value, when story reached German forces, was incalculable but substantial. The verdict came February 1945, all charges dismissed. Crawford received Silver Star, third highest military decoration, for extraordinary leadership and moral courage under extreme conditions. The citation specifically noted, Sergeant Crawford's actions exemplified American values at their finest, demonstrated that humanity and military effectiveness are not contradictory, and produced intelligence windfall that contributed significantly to Allied success. But the citation couldn't capture larger truth. Crawford had proven something about American identity that resonated beyond military achievement. The human stories multiplied. Greta Hoffman survived war, immigrated to Iowa 1951, contacted Crawford through Red Cross, became lifelong friend of family that saved her life. She testified at Crawford's funeral 1987 that she built life in America because one cold day, American soldiers showed her that enemy could be human. Klein became advocate for German-American reconciliation, speaking to veteran groups about night she learned enemies could choose humanity over ideology. Weber practiced medicine in West Germany post-war, trained generation of doctors with philosophy. Medical ethics transcends conflict. Americans taught me this when I was enemy. The broader impact shaped post-war policy. The story was documented by Stars and Stripes, military newspaper, and circulated among troops. It became teaching example at officer training schools for next 30 years. Military ethics curriculum added case study. The Crawford decision, when humanity serves strategy. The lesson, treating enemies humanely isn't weakness or sentiment. It's pragmatic recognition that war's objective is peace, and peace requires seeing enemy as human again. The statistical analysis was revealing. U.S. Army analyzed prisoner cooperation rates 1944-1945. Prisoners who reported experiencing unexpected American humanity showed significantly higher cooperation during interrogation, provided higher quality intelligence, and required less guarding resources. The operational savings from reduced guard requirements alone exceeded $12 million across European theater. Humanity produced measurable military advantage. The cultural impact resonated beyond military. American media coverage of story, sanitized for propaganda purposes but essentially accurate, reinforced narrative that American forces fought differently. They fought not from hate but from necessity. They fought to end war, not perpetuate it. When circumstances permitted humanity, Americans chose it even at personal cost. This wasn't naivety or weakness. It was strength of identity rooted in values that transcended circumstance. The long-term diplomatic impact shaped Cold War. When American forces occupied Germany post-1945, memories of soldiers like Crawford mattered. Germans who experienced American humanity during conflict were more receptive to American presence during occupation. They became advocates for Western alignment rather than Soviet. The economic miracle of West Germany versus stagnation of East Germany had many causes, but foundational trust built by soldiers who chose humanity over hate was a significant factor. The personal legacy for Crawford was quieter but profound. He returned to Cedar Rapids, worked hardware store, raised family, rarely spoke of war, but letters preserved by family revealed his thinking. To nephew considering military service 1968, you'll face choices where regulations say one thing, heart says another. Choose heart when you can live with consequences. I gave away coats in Snowstorm, lost 3 fingers to frostbite, saved 12 lives. Best trade I ever made. The story entered American cultural memory as example of who Americans aspire to be when tested. It appeared in textbooks, documentary films, military ethics courses. It wasn't unique. Thousands of similar acts occurred during war, most unrecorded, but Crawford's story was documented completely enough to become teaching tool. The lesson: Americans at their best choose humanity even when ideology, regulation, or convenience suggest otherwise. The final statistics told complete story. 11 American soldiers suffered hypothermia and frostbite. 3 required extended medical care. 0 died. 12 German prisoners survived to build lives in post-war world. 8 eventually immigrated to America. Intelligence gained from Weber contributed to operations that military historians estimate saved 200-300 American lives. The propaganda value, when story spread among German forces, contributed to demoralization that accelerated surrender rates. The mathematical equation Crawford solved that December afternoon wasn't about coats or temperature. It was about what America means when values face testing. The answer: America means choosing humanity even when regulations, strategy, or ideology suggest enemies deserve something less. This wasn't weakness. It was recognition that war's purpose is peace, and peace requires seeing enemy as human again. Crawford proved this truth in Frozen Forest when he ordered coats removed and accepted consequences. 70 years later, the lesson remains. How we treat enemies when no one's watching defines who we become when conflict ends. This story reminds us that humanity transcends even war's darkest moments. If Crawford's choice inspired you, hit subscribe to discover more untold stories of courage and compassion from World War II. Drop a comment sharing what you'd have done in Crawford's position. Would you have given your coat? History remembers those who chose humanity when it cost everything. Let's honor their legacy by remembering their stories. Subscribe now, and let's keep these lessons alive together.